Now to the latest from the war in the Middle East, and Iran has responded angrily to the latest warning from U.S. President Donald Trump with one of its own. In an online post overnight, Trump said Iran must fully reopen the crucial Strait of Hormuz to oil tankers, or else the U.S. military will attack the country's power plants. Iran's paramilitary speaker hit back, saying if Trump carries out his threat, quote, critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and oil facilities throughout the region will be considered legitimate targets and will be destroyed, and the price of oil will remain high for a long time. And that response comes as Iranian state media says claims the Strait of Hormuz is open to all vessels except those of, quote, enemy countries. An Iranian MP also says ships are being guaranteed safe passage in return for a $2 million fee. Meanwhile, Israel has come under attack from Iran. 15 people were wounded in a strike on Tel Aviv. The missile carried a cluster bomb warhead, spreading munition over a wide area. The attack follows back-to-back attacks on two communities in southern Israel located near a nuclear site. The CBC's Crystal Gamansing is in Jerusalem with more.
Those attacks led to the call of a mass casualty event. As you had mentioned, the South has been pretty much spared in this conflict so far. They haven't been targeted. But last night at around 11 o'clock, Israel's defense systems were launched to try to intercept that missile coming from Iran. The air defense systems failed, and it was a direct impact. This is a residential area with lots of high-rise buildings clustered together. Crews were on that site from about 11 o'clock right through to the morning hours, searching the debris, trying to make sure there was no one that was left in the rubble. More than 150 people were injured. People talked about being in those communities. Some of them got to shelters, but not everyone when that direct impact hit. Let's take a listen to what some people in the community had to say.
We listened, boom! Oh, everybody was in the mamad, but not I. It was something very, very afraid.
Yeah, it's scary. You know, they bomb us, so and we never actually, this city never experienced something like that actually bombed the city, like straight hit.
So many people are now trying to see if they can recover anything from their homes, trying to figure out exactly where they are going to go. Meanwhile, in nearby Dimona, another direct hit from an Iranian missile. That location is of interest because in that city nearby, not right around where that strike was, but there is an Israeli nuclear facility out there. So a lot of people are talking about wondering what exactly it was that was targeted. But again, the strike happened in a residential area, very similar sort of setup with lots of high-rise buildings, densely packed area. But important to note, in these two direct impacts by an Iranian missile, at this point, officials are saying no one was killed, but they did have a number of wounded and some seriously wounded.
These have been two of the biggest casualty events from an airstrike since the war began. What has the reaction been there, Crystal?
Well, it's important. Let's start with what we're hearing from the IAEA regarding that strike around the same area where there is that Israeli nuclear facility. Officials are saying that they have not received any reports of any damage to that actual site. So we know that that site, at least from what the IAEA is saying, is secure. Again, want to just stress that the hit was not at the nuclear site, but in the same city as near that nuclear site. We are also hearing from Iran's defense ministry spokesperson. That person is saying that the Iranian armed forces will continue, quote, uninterrupted combat until the enemy comes to a complete halt and surrenders. Reza Talik is saying that the Islamic Republic has the capabilities to target Israeli sites, but also any support for Israel's war. That includes American sites across the region. And of course, we have been seeing that ongoing. We also heard from Itamar Ben-Gvir. He was at that strike site in Iran early this morning, saying that, this is war, this is the result of war, but encourage people to stay strong, saying they will continue their efforts to crush the Iranian regime and win. We don't know at this point if there is any indication of when these ongoing strikes, the ongoing war between Israel, the US, and Iran will come to an end. Of course, we haven't even touched on what's going on in Lebanon. So very, very active here in the Middle East into the fourth week now.
That's CBC's Crystal Gamansing in Jerusalem. For his perspective on these developments, we're now joined by Edward Fishman in New York. He's a former U.S. State Department official and author of Choke Points, American Power in the Age of Economic Warfare. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Let's continue with the latest developments, specifically President Donald Trump's ultimatum and his threat to, quote, obliterate Iran's energy facilities in the Strait of Hormuz if it's not open in 48 hours. What is your take on what the president is now saying?
I think President Trump is playing with fire. The Iranians have sort of identified the Achilles heel of the United States in this war, and that's the low tolerance for rising oil prices in the United States. So if Trump were to actually take an action like attacking power plants in Iran, and Iran were to retaliate by attacking, say, the Abqaiq oil facility in Saudi Arabia or other energy infrastructure in the Gulf, it's going to send oil prices even higher than they are today. So I do worry that if Trump doesn't actually get this ultimatum to work, and I think that there's every sign that the Iranians aren't just going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz because of a threat, then this could lead to an escalating tit for tat that leads to an even bigger disruption to energy markets.
Let's talk about Iran's staying power, because we know that it has issued a warning of its own in response to what Trump has said, saying it would target U.S. infrastructure, including energy facilities in the Gulf, if President Trump carried out that threat. What does this tell us about Iran's willingness to stay in not only this war, but also a prolonged war?
Yeah, I think this has been one of the big disappointments for the United States and Israel in this war so far, which is that despite decapitating the Iranian leadership, really taking out the supreme leader and many of the top echelons of Iranian leaders, it seems like the Islamic Republic does not show any signs of collapsing. I think the other thing that they didn't anticipate was that Iran has been able to disrupt the energy market and close the Strait of Hormuz, not by physically blocking it, not by putting thousands of sea mines in the Strait of Hormuz, but just by targeting about a dozen or so ships with drones, these low-cost drones that cost about $10,000 a pop. That's an asymmetric retaliatory capacity that's going to be very difficult for the United States really ever to completely neutralize.
We know the global impacts of what's happening there in the Middle East on the cost of oil, and people are seeing it at the pumps when they're trying to fill up their vehicles, especially here in Canada. But if this escalation, or rather if this war escalates and it continues for a prolonged period of time like we're talking about, who actually benefits from it, the U.S. or Iran?
Well, neither side particularly benefits. I think you'd have to look outside of the United States and Iran for countries that benefit. I think at the very top of the list is Russia. So Russia entered this war in a really difficult spot. In February, their oil revenues were the lowest that they had been since February 2022, when Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that's because US, European, Canadian sanctions were finally starting to bite. And you saw these massive discounts for Russian oil. They were selling for about $30 below the market price. Well, last week, Trump eased sanctions on Russia to try to address this oil price shock. And overnight, Russian oil went from $30 below the benchmark to actually selling at a premium. So this is generating about $200 million of additional revenue for Putin each day. So he's looking like the big winner of this war so far.
Let's talk about the strategy of the United States right now. Do you think President Trump and his administration could win this war without putting boots on the ground?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I think where the situation they're at right now, it's very clear that they need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And so there's really only two ways to do that. One is you cut some sort of a deal with the Iranian government. That's probably going to involve making some significant concessions. I don't think the Iranian government's going to be satisfied with a simple ceasefire. Maybe they'd want more sanctions relief. Maybe they'd want the United States to draw down some of its bases in the Middle East. But I think the alternative, which it looks like Trump is more likely to do, is to escalate militarily. And in order to actually secure the strait, you need to get shipping far enough within range so that it can't be attacked by Iranian drones. And these drones can fly very far. So you probably need some level of ground invasion, some level of occupation and buffer zone on the coastal areas of the Persian Gulf to actually provide guaranteed security for ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
Finally, before we let you go, just want to ask you one last question then about President Trump here and his possible endgame. Is there a risk or a gamble for him if he declares a victory in this war without actually opening the Strait of Hormuz or achieving any of the objectives he had listed when this war began, including that unconditional surrender in Iran?
I think this war is a humiliating defeat for the United States if it ends with the Strait of Hormuz in Iranian hands. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important maritime choke point. We've all seen it. 20% of global oil supplies, liquefied natural gas go through the strait every day, a third of fertilizer and helium, all kinds of other commodities. And so if Iran is left in charge of this strait at the end of the war, that's a huge defeat for the United States.
Edward Fishman, former State Department official and author, thank you so much for joining us and for your insight this morning.
My pleasure.